Hello, and welcome to our Startup Showcase. I am Stephen Collins. I'm the CEO of Matter, a healthcare technology incubator and innovation hub. Our mission is to accelerate the pace of change of healthcare, and we do three things in service of this mission. First, we incubate startups. Since we launched in 2015, we've worked with more than 700 companies, ranging from very early to growth stage startups. And we have a suite of services to help them at every stage of development. Our member companies have raised more than $2 billion in aggregate to fuel their growth. Secondly, we work with large organizations such as health systems and life sciences companies and payers to strengthen their innovation capacity. We help them find value in emerging technologies, unlock the full potential of their internal innovators, and create a more human-centered healthcare experience through system-level collaborations. Third, we are a nexus for people who are passionate about healthcare innovation. We bring people together to be inspired and learn and connect with each other. And so we produce a lot of programs, including large-scale events for the broader community, as well as small programs that are exclusively for our members. At our startup showcases, we choose a topic and we invite three Matter member companies to present their solutions to a group of industry experts. The last time we did this, we featured three companies focused on a specific area of innovation, women's health. Today, we're featuring three companies in a particular technology area, medical devices. So today's companies are addressing aspects of orthopedic trauma and cardiac care, remote care. We will hear from Edge Surgical, from RhythmScience, and from Nextgen Port. We have three experts with us who will ask questions of the startups following their presentations. David Powers is the general manager of Stryker Orthopedics, Great Lakes. He's been with Stryker for 17 years and knows this market inside and out. Ethel Massing is our program leader at Parkview Health. Ethel's been with Parkview for about 10 years. Parkview is the leading health system in Eastern Indiana with a very strong focus on innovation. And finally, Marco DiPolo is a global head of acceleration, insights, and open innovation at Roche Diabetes Care. He's been working in the medical device industry for more than 20 years. My colleague, Kay Nietzkaj, will moderate, and at this time, I am delighted to turn it over to her.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. So like Stephen said, my name is Kay Nietzkaj, and I'll be the moderator today. So up first, to kick things off, we have Chris Wilson, President and CEO of Edge Surgical.
Well, thank you, Kay. Thank you, Stephen, for having me here. Really excited to show you what we're all about here. But as Kay mentioned, I'm Christopher Wilson, the President and CEO of Edge Surgical. What we do is we develop and manufacture smart digital tools that enable both orthopedic and spine surgeons to more accurately and safely place surgical screws. So I'll do a little background here and kind of what that means a bit. So, in a big part of the trauma business in the United States with regards to broken bones, for instance, if you maybe get hit by a car, you fall off your bike, or a ski accident, you're going to have to place an internal fixation plate into the bone, as you see here. And to ensure that this plate is fixated to the bone, you're going to have to drill on either side of the fracture, as you see here. This is in the wrist. And you use what's called a depth gauge that tells you, hey, is this a 10 millimeter depth? Is this 20 millimeters, 60 millimeters? So you can put in the appropriate length of screw. We like to say the screw has got to be like Goldilocks port. It's got to be just right. It can't be too long or too short, because the length of these screws are extremely important to the overall efficacy of this procedures. And getting it right with legacy tools and techniques, up to 25% of the time, you don't get it right, as you can see here. And this screw, it doesn't take a surgeon to understand that this screw is too long and will cause trauma to adjacent tissue. But we've talked to several of our hand surgeons, if you can't recognize this is a wrist, but after talking to our hand surgeons, they feel that actually this screw here is a bit problematic as well, because you have an important tendon that runs along the wrist, and that could rub up against the end of the screw head or the screw end, and at worst can cause a tendon rupture. But this is not a isolated incident. You can see some other instances here where actually, if you can see in this image, the actual screw is poking out of the skin. So not a great thing. And the root causes associated with a lot of these old, outdated surgical tools used in orthopedic surgery. What you see here, as I alluded to on a few slides earlier, is the depth gauge. It's been used for almost 100 years. Every manufacturer in the world has this. It's very ubiquitous, but they're all limited by the same issues. One is, the poor hook design, which is a key feature to enable the device to anchor itself against the bone. You're using kind of old, outdated analog measurement. And because these are reusable devices, these are a haven of bioburden contamination, which recent studies, which published studies have shown. And you can kind of see issues here as a case study at Porter Ventus in Denver, Colorado, in the orthopedic and spine space. These 30 surgical tools caused a lot of infections, and one person actually died of their infection. So big hot button topic. But the cost implications are immense here. Just on the left-hand side of the screen here with a screw measurement alone, beyond just thinking about a tendon rupture, more simply, if your screw is too long or too short, you have to remove it and replace it. And those screws cannot be reused. So you really honestly just throw them away. So that's just wasted costs thrown into the trash. Orthopedic screws and spine screw. I mean, spine screw could be as much as $1,000 each. So you can get the point here that this is not a cheap thing to throw away. And then beyond that, obviously, the issue of surgical site infection, such a big hot button topic here in the United States. Just addressing one surgical site infection beyond thinking about someone dying is quite expensive. So what we've been able to do is, simply put, we've created the digital version of an old, outdated analog technology. And the things we've been able to do here are, one, we've improved the hook design, which enables our device to better anchor itself against the bone. We've created this universal nose that fits in the vast majority of plate sizes out in the market. Of course, you have this very nice, clear OLED digital screen for the measurement. And we added this feature to lock the screen in place, which all put together, we've published studies have shown that we've been able to decrease mismeasurement error by 90%. This is a fully single-use device. It comes sterile, ready to use, so there's no risk of bioburden contamination. This device is FDA cleared, so it's on the market here in the United States. It does have its CE mark, and we've started cases in New Zealand, Panama, Ireland, and soon to be South Africa. So very exciting time. You can kind of see a bit of an eye chart here, some images of it being used at different facilities, and some of the smattering of just the tip of the iceberg of where we're at with regards to being used. I'd say right now a big chunk of our business is actually in Florida, which is good. So since we launched about a year ago, where we just eclipsed our 1,000th case, and we've gotten a lot of approvals. 75 accounts have approved our device, and we use a huge chunk of our business comes through distributors, including we have a sales and distribution partnership with Smith & Nephew. If you're not aware, Smith & Nephew is one of the larger orthopedic companies in the world. And the good news, we're starting to get this stickiness. We've had 16 accounts reorder not once, but 2 or 3 times already. So we're really starting to grow there. And with our partnership with Smith & Nephew, things are really looking good for us. So very exciting time, no doubt. Beyond that, I'll highlight kind of our next gen device here that's in development, that's aimed for the spine market. Keep in mind here, the spine surgeons, not only do they need to be sure that they have the right length of screw, they also have to ensure that the screw is safely away from a nerve. As you can imagine, in your back, there's a lot of nerves. So we've designed the device accordingly. So one of the things we've done here is, obviously, we have our digital depth measurement, which enables surgeons to more accurately understand the depth. We have this all tap feature, which gives surgeons more control when creating the bone screw hole. And then we have what's called this EMG neuromonitoring or neurostimulation. And for the layman, think of that as your stud finder for nerves. Through a simple red, green, and an audible feedback, you can understand real time if you're getting close to a nerve or not. This is, again, still in development, but it works well in pig and sheep. We've had our FDA pre-sub meeting that went very well. We're probably a good 8 to 12 months from submission, but right now we're in a really good spot to continue to move this forward with the blessing from the FDA on our regulatory path and approach. I'll highlight our team here because I really do think our team is our best asset. Myself, I've been in the medical device space for over 20 years, including my time at Abbott Diagnostics. I was in PwC's medical device practice. I'll also highlight my co-founder, head of sales, Casey Hughes, on the top right. Over 20 years in ortho spine sales experience, 10 of which were at Medtronic. And 2 of those years at Medtronic, he was in the President's Club, which is the top 1% of sales achievement. I'll also highlight in the middle left, Chris Lyons. He's the former global director of business development at Medtronic. So for 10 years, he was leading up all the acquisitions there. So we really have a good team of folks beyond just who I mentioned to ensure that, we're heading in the right direction, we're doing the right things. And for those who, for our investors, we're ensuring that we're positioning them for a very valuable exit in the near future. But a pretty little ball on this real quick. I'll just say, hey, about who we are and what we do. Think about the old mercury thermometer. Today, we're using the digital one. Now, we want to do the same thing with orthopedic tools, move that technology frontier forward from the analog age to the digital age. And that's all. And I'll pause there for questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chris. At this time, I'll ask our 3 panelists, David, Ethel, and Marco, to please come off camera. And you can go ahead and begin asking Chris your questions.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start. Really well done. Thank you. I guess my first question would be around exclusivity. You talked about your distributor model right now. How are you handling building that group of individuals that have the ability to provide your product? And is there any exclusivity involved in those agreements?
No exclusivity. We did that by design, and they were fine with that. So if you're probably aware, Dave, Smith & Nephew leans more on 1099s and distributors for their sales force, where Stryker has more, direct full-time employees. So when Smith & Nephew approached us, we because obviously at the end of the day, we want to get acquired. Having that exclusivity ties your hands. So we came to an agreement where there's no exclusivity, except for the individual the distributors that we use in their region. But if someone came along, Stryker or DePuy Synthes, whoever, and is interested in taking this on, there is a minor breakup clause for each of the individual distributors where needed, if we need to go down that road.
I'll go next. Thanks, Christopher, for sharing. I have one question just for understanding. Would you agree that you're kind of in the measurement technology business? Is that accurate?
Measurement, yeah, I think that would be a good way to categorize it. Not just, if you even think about our spine device, which also measures depth, it also kind of measures safe distance from a nerve. So I think that's an appropriate characterization.
Okay, thanks. I have 2 questions. So the first one is, what are some of the existing or emerging technologies that you see could compete for the same problem than your solution?
Sure. So obviously, our main competitor on the ortho depth gauge side of things is kind of that legacy metal depth gauge I mentioned. Obviously, we compete very well for that. That metal depth gauge has been around for a long time. But what you're starting to see a bit more, and the Stryker folks, I'm sure Dave has seen some of the drills that have this smart tech on it that can do some depth measurement. I think McKinley Orthopedic is an example of a company that has it. But like a lot of drills, they're expensive. It does come with a bit of learning, and regardless of whether you use a drill or not, you're still going to use a depth gauge. So we're definitely seeing it in the orthopedic space, kind of the main competitor being these smart drills. But we will be, through our analysis, we beat smart drills on costs alone. And then on the spine side of things, the main competitor there is kind of the navigation systems, or kind of new out there, these spine robots, which are definitely cool, very sexy things, but they haven't quite demonstrated clinical value yet for the fact that those things are extremely expensive. So we position ourselves on the spine side of things in the surgery center setting, where they would never want to buy a robot or nav machine, just really too expensive. But that's where we fit nicely, where a huge chunk of the business in spine is going to the surgery center setting. That's where we fit there.
All right, great, thanks.
Chris, thanks so much for your presentation. I have a question. A lot of hospitals are working on green initiatives. So, what's your thought behind using the single-use device that's going to be thrown away?
This is a great question because we used to get a little pushback a few years ago on this very, very question. But about a year and a half ago, a recent study came out specifically looking at spine and orthopedic reusable tools versus single use. It showed that the single-use tools have a far less negative impact on the environment than the standard reusable tools, for the simple fact that if you've ever been to sterile processing center in a hospital and you look at kind of how these tools are autoclaved and reprocessed, sterilized, they're utilizing a lot of power, a lot of water, and a lot of chemicals. And so for single-use devices, that's something we don't have to worry about. And so I can certainly share the study, but it really helped us, I think, get into New Zealand, to be honest. So at the end of the day, our devices being single-use actually are better for the environment compared to the reusable counterparts.
One more for you, Chris. In terms of just right now, we're seeing a lot of issues with supply chain and costs. How are you attacking that in terms of back orders, the ability to ramp up quickly based on demand?
Yeah, we're not immune to that either. So it's a very good question, David. And I'll say this, it wasn't explicit in this deck, but we are actually raising money. So if anyone on here who is interested, we're raising just a little bit of money. But part of what we raise is to get ahead of this supply chain hurdles, which includes for us PCBAs and plastics in particular. We've already bought up about a year and a half to 2 years of PCBAs ahead of time. And we've about a year to year and a half worth of plastic resin. Candidly, this is not something that we thought we'd have to do a couple of years ago, but as you're aware, these things kind of popped up. So we got ahead of it and we bought up, at least a year to year and a half's worth of raw materials as part of the money raise we just did.
Then one last one, Christopher. So the spine industry specifically, there's a lot of collaboration with key opinion leaders, with surgeons, trauma similar. What's your plan to continue to build partnerships and have champions out there based on the fact that a lot of that comes with a cost? Is it equity that you're looking to give out? Is it contracts of some sort? Or are you simply basing it on the merit of the product?
That's a good question. So we do have some really good key opinion leaders on the spine side of things, whether it's Dr. Frank Phillips, probably one of the top 10 spine surgeons in the United States here out of Chicago, Dr. Neil Anand out of Cedars in the LA area, and so on and so forth. For all of them, we give a small equity grant, which includes things for helping with IP submissions, so on and so forth. We do not give royalties. So we've designed it as such that we're pretty clear. It follows all Sunshine Act regulations, and that's how we've compensated our key opinion leaders.
Fantastic, thank you. That is our time for Q&A. At this time, we'll have our next startup come on, which is Sean Kumar.
Hi, my name is Sean Kumar. I am with RhythmScience. My background is I was a software developer that went into the medtech industry, worked for St. Jude Medical, which is then acquired by Abbott, in cardiac device world, and was working with medical devices, implanted devices in the body before they were smart devices. So these were very important life-saving technologies like defibrillators and pacemakers. And there's data on these devices, and starting in about 2008, 2010, they started to transmit data wirelessly. And now we're in a world of connected devices everywhere. People are wearing devices on their wrists and getting devices implanted in their body for a variety of things. And the use cases for these are going to grow exponentially over time. So seeing that trend a few years ago, I left the industry and decided to start a software and data healthcare firm, which is RhythmScience. So our tagline is remote cardiology made simple. We're very interested in cardiac data in particular. Cardiology is an interesting field for a lot of different reasons. It's one of the earliest fields when it comes to device innovation due to its life-saving nature, and it's had the longest run-up of connectivity. So, going back to that time frame here of about 10 or 12 years ago, there's new devices entering the market all the time. And there's a ramp up for those devices to become connected devices. And then there's also the interest now from the world of consumer wearables, Fitbit, Apple, and all of this, and their interest in getting into healthcare, whether that's self-directed or provider-based care. So our basic thesis is that remote cardiac data saves lives if that data is intelligently monitored. And what we saw firsthand, and the core team here are all people that have been in the field, working in doctors' offices, working in surgical suites. What we saw is that there's a lot of data that's very useful that can make a difference in terms of a patient being admitted to a hospital or a phone call and a medication change happening. And if that data is structured in the right way, if it's filtered, if all the noise is removed, if it's brought to the right person at the right time, you can make a huge difference on a patient's outcome. And you can do that at scale. And these ultimately end up being much cheaper interventions. And this is really in the information matrix, more so than it is in the actual hardware side of things. And so this is really what our fundamental thesis is. And when we've seen a lot of traction and seen the results in the 2.5 years of our operation here. The problem that we see in providers or remote monitoring companies in general is a proliferation of data coming in from a variety of different data sources. So for example, if you are running a pacemaker clinic, you're going to have 4 different manufacturers you're going to work with, and you're going to have data coming in from patients in other ways. You're going to get EKG data, they're going to call you on the phone. You're going to have other devices as well. And you as a provider are responsible for managing all that data. There's an accountability component here. Who saw the data and when? There's an accuracy component to this. Is the data accurate? And so what we find is across the board, the attempts of solutions around this are usually ad hoc, using spreadsheets, fax machines, what have you, to make this all work. And what we find there is there's leaks in clinical data, and there's leaks in revenue. So fundamentally, you have devices that transmit 24 hours, 7 days a week that can make a difference in a patient's outcome. You have clinics that are missing revenue opportunities because obviously in the healthcare world, there has to be revenue ascribed to any of these works. And what you have are diffused data coming in different ways that don't necessarily map well to existing CPT code infrastructure or the way that EHR systems are meant to track and bill. What you have is clinical data that's being missed. And we've seen clinics 120 days into a data point hitting their ability to retrieve it, and it's not retrieved yet. So there's both a liability problem there, and there's also a patient care problem. So, and then staffing in this country, before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic. Staffing problems are here to stay. And what the best attempts to try to solve that with the remote world and everything else that we're entering into here, healthcare providers are challenged. There weren't enough people before, and there won't be enough people now, even though the amount of cardiac data is growing exponentially. Cardiac data is complex. It requires the right people and the right tools. And that fundamentally is what our solution is, which is a platform that can input and retrieve data from a variety of different sources. We have partnerships with over 10 different hardware manufacturers, and that number is growing. We take data from a variety of different formats and have algorithms here that can use OCR, HL7, APIs, a variety of other techniques, and then make that data usable, actionable to the end users. The end users can be anybody in the healthcare system, and that's what's interesting about the US healthcare system is there's a lot of consumers of this data, anyone from a doctor to a nurse to a medical assistant to third-party companies that are actually running parts of clinics and hospitals. We do deep work inside of EHR systems. We also do integrations with hardware manufacturers. We provide compliance and analytics tools. What you find is that there's not a lot of knowledge around what cardiac data means to a practice, the number of patients that are transmitting cardiac data, what the relative value of that data is to the practice, and what missed opportunities they are. So one of the key components of what we're doing here is actually providing the analytics and the knowledge for administrators and providers to know what's happening inside of their clinic. We're also facilitating collaborative work because chronic disease management inherently involves a variety of stakeholders. And for those stakeholders to do their job right, they need a place to work where they can communicate and they can cross collaborate, especially given this is a 24/7 type of business. It can't simply be in the domain of one person. And that's what we see in a lot of places we work with. One person has the keys, the login and the password to the data. If that person's gone, no one else has it. This is one integrated system. And so from the very beginning, we knew architecturally, we wanted to make our system work across a variety of cardiac data modalities. And they're all different, but the same. So you have these implantable devices up here. You have devices that are new in the market that are implantable, that are in the traction and scaling mode. They're getting NTAPs, they're getting new CPT coding. Along the way, they're trying to figure out how to grow and scale in the market. They butt up against the information wall here, which is EHR integrations and also servicing around those devices. So an example of that is CardioMEMS here. We work with startup companies that are making new devices like 12-lead EKG devices and a variety of other peripherals and components. And the platform is, yeah, you good?
Yep, that is the end of your time, Sean. Thank you. All right, perfect. So let's have our panelists, David, Etho, and Marco. You can come back on screen for our Q&A. Go right ahead.
Great. Well, I'll jump right in since this is right up my alley. I have spent many hours working on cardiology implementation projects and actually doing something similar. This is one of the last projects I worked on before moving to innovation. So applaud what you're trying to do because it is a very difficult world. On your one slide, you showed the EHR integration was bidirectional. Do you anticipate, can you talk a little bit about that integration and that workflow?
If the bidirectionality is really important, where we get that, it's super valuable for both sides where that's enabled. And that's for patient demographics, patient medications, things like that. If we're able to get that into the system, it really improves reduces the amount of work that needs to be done on both sides to really make a scalable program. In a lot of places, it ends up being unidirectional. We're going to send you reports and billing data in. And that's going to save a lot of time for everybody. But the bidirectionality is a nice thing to have. The other thing we can do is embedded apps inside of EHRs. We're thinking about App Orchard and things like that. And I find that to be really valuable. But again, that's dependent on a system and their ability to allow for that. When we work with smaller practices, small and medium-sized businesses, that's a lot easier, right? And they're more open to or have less security or legal burden to allow something like that to happen, and also reap greater economic benefits from it.
I have a question. Thanks for sharing, Sean. And one of the questions I have is, currently we see a lot of remote care solutions in the market, and especially since the pandemic, right? A lot of acceleration and investment into remote care solutions. My question to you is, what makes you feel confident that your solution is positioned in the right market and that you can compete with all the emerging remote care solutions that are popping up everywhere?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've been tracking that as well. And we started the company before the pandemic, and we're benefited from those tailwinds of a lot. There was a lot more interest in what we were doing because of the pandemic. The solutions that I'm seeing in the marketplace, you have provider healthcare delivery companies, primarily PE backed, right? And then you also have so RPM solutions around, very sort of generalized hypertension or maybe other chronic diseases. What we're doing is more infrastructural. So we work with a lot of RPM companies, and they use our platform as they go into healthcare systems and private practices. And it's more multi-clinic management. So a lot of these solutions are really meant to be self-contained inside of a healthcare system or practice. And what we really see is that there's a need for staffing. That staffing requirement means that people are working in different places and different clinics doing some of the same specialized work. So that's really where our tool set is. We see ourselves working more with some of these providers and have these conversations underway right now. These more generic chronic disease management companies, and taking some of our specialized interfacing with technologies like CardioMEMS and things like that are devices that probably a lot of these companies have never heard of, but there's a lot of interest in the specialty market in these healthcare systems. Where basically, these are folks that have been involved in these clinical trials for 10 or 20 years, right? And so we think that's a really great approach to get and work with these systems. And then these other kinds of things that we're seeing a lot of interest in the market around are relatively simple and generic population management tools. And whether we're providing API data feeds into those companies or we're sort of sitting next to them in an adjacent fashion, it's not really a problem. We've seen that in our conversations, what we present when we go into heart failure departments at Yale or other places. No one's really presenting this particular solution stack.
I have just one follow-up question. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. If there's one problem that your solution, your biz model, does solve better, faster, cheaper, more effective than anyone else, what would be that problem that you're solving better, much better than anyone else?
The problem is that scale of patients, a large number of patients' data coming in a way that's really easy to understand what's important and what isn't. So really the simplicity of, let's say, a clinic with 3,000 patients, right? And you log in Monday morning, you have a cup of coffee sitting next to you, and you got to figure out what's the most important thing to do today. We've really built a system that'll help you figure that out so you can safely get your day oriented with all the other things that are going on. And that's really what we've put the most attention into. And we've gotten that positive feedback from Houston Methodist, Providence, Cedars-Sinai, Torrance Memorial, and other facilities that we work with.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Sean, really large demand, as you mentioned, for this type of service. We've entered into this quite a bit through our robotics programs and total joint replacement. I think that your focus on driving cost from the system is key. Can you talk to me a little bit? We've run into, some barriers, if you will, around just the IT side of things, the security, I guess the data itself. So can you go back and spend a little bit more time on who owns that data and how have you navigated some of those barriers to this point?
What's interesting about cardiac data is, it's going to go to a vendor first, right? You have a connected device in the house, so it's going to go back to a vendor. And already, providers are making a deal with the vendor, right? That there's some sort of data exchange that's going to happen, right? When we work with the providers, whether it's another company or it's a healthcare system or a practice, we're going to set up our own data agreements with that provider, and it may mean that usually, they own the rights. We may have some de-identified or anonymized rights that we can do for product development. But also, these healthcare manufacturers, and what's interesting about this world is, and I'm sure it's, when you think about Abbott and Medtronic and companies like this, there's a whole phalanx of people involved with that data as well, right? And so one of the things I think is interesting is that you look at some of these requirements in privacy and data share, and you look at some of these big med tech companies, and it's like there's not really a one-to-one adherence to those things in a lot of ways because of offshore of support and tax support and these kinds of things. But we fit within that nexus, and we're comfortable with however a provider structures those deals, and we're able to work through a lot of those agreements on an expedited fashion due to the acute need for services like this inside of their clinics.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. That includes this portion of the Q&A. So thank you, everyone. So on to our final and third presentation from Kathy Skinner from Nextgen Port.
20 years ago, cancer came to my house. We all know someone who's been touched by cancer, and for me, it was my father. When my dad was at home and And in between treatments, there was no way to keep track of changes in his blood cell counts and vitals. Sadly, and on more than one occasion, he got an infection that landed him in the hospital and delayed his next chemo. Many years later, I was leading an exercise program for cancer patients. The patients were having the same issues as my dad. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. That's why we created Nextgen Port. Nextgen Port is the first of its kind implanted smart port that detects early signs of infection by measuring changes in blood cell counts, heart function, and vitals. By remotely monitoring patients using optical sensors and machine learning, we help cancer patients stay on their treatment longer. And we provide physicians with the data they need to deliver patient-centric care. Many patients like Stephanie receive a chemotherapy port implanted in their chest. The port is a delivery tool for the drugs to fight cancer. 50% of cancer patients undergoing treatment suffer from low white blood cell counts that put them at a higher risk of infection and a possible delay in treatment. Research shows that a 4-week delay in treatment creates a higher risk of death. The consequence of this very common side effect costs the US healthcare system $2.3 billion annually. So how does Nextgen Port work? We measure blood cells as they flow past our optical system in vivo. Much like EasyPass captures the images of license plates of cars as they drive through a toll booth. The combination of blood cell data plus vitals like heart rate and body temperature creates a robust data package that we hand off to physicians so they can take action, such as scheduling blood transfusion or growth factor. And then also to the payers and the providers to help them manage costs and increase clinical efficiencies. Looking at the size of the market, 19 million people around the world every year are diagnosed with cancer. Almost 2 million of those patients receive an implanted chemotherapy port. Our forecast shows a 475 million annual recurring revenue within 5 years of commercial launch. Beyond the size of the market, think of the impact that we can have on the lives of patients. So why now? And why haven't port manufacturers done this before? Well, we've done our research. We've learned that port manufacturers see the port as a delivery device, chemotherapy in, blood out. What we've done is reimagine the port as a data tracking and collection device. We compete against lab tests and wearables, which each have their levels of limitations and inconvenience. There's another competitor who's also measuring oxygen level and body temperature, and we gather those data points as well. Our novel feature is that we measure changes in blood cell counts and heart function in the body. To date, we've built and tested our benchtop prototype using annotated diseased blood as well as swine blood. We've measured blood cell differentiation compared to a gold standard lab test called flow cytometry with a 95% correlation index. Now we're working on miniaturizing the technology and the footprint of the port, continuing to do our blood studies and tests, and working on animal models in swine this fall. We have a line of sight to our market and commercialization. We filed several patents. Our FDA strategy consists of a 510(k) for the hardware and the software, and we verified CPT codes for reimbursement. We have early traction. We're in a second year of a collaboration agreement with Mayo Clinic, where we meet weekly with one of their leading oncologists. We have investment from MHub in Chicago, Baxter, as well as Edward Elmhurst Ventures. We have a line of sight to our marketing and commercialization, where we envision licensing the technology to port manufacturers with a combination of hardware plus software for remote patient monitoring. And we anticipate commercial launch in 2026. We're in the midst of a seed round of funding where we're raising $2 million. The funds will allow us to build out our IP portfolio even further, to continue to miniaturize the technology, do the animal models and blood studies, as well as add new members to our team. Our team has decades of experience in medical device, business, and research, and each of our team members have previously launched other companies. Our board has industry leaders in medical device, commercialization, quality and regulatory, and most importantly, patient advocacy. I like to think that if Nextgen Port had been available, when cancer came to my house, my dad would be here today.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Marco, David, Ethel, go right ahead.
Thanks, Kathy, for that presentation. Just very, very interesting technology and what you're trying to do here. I do have a question about the data, because you are collecting new data and something that clinics are not used to getting data from their ports. So what's your idea on handling that data and then the delivery of it?
That's a great question. Handling the new data. We speak with our oncologist, Dr. Haddad from Mayo Clinic, almost every week about the data and what to do with it and what do patients need and what do physicians need. So your point is well taken that the data coming out of the port is never been seen by physicians before, because it's longitudinal trending data in between chemotherapy visits, where no one has ever been able to get biological read on a cellular level what's happening to a patient at home. We understand that physicians are humans too, and they might not like to change their behavior patterns very much. So we are working on a managed services product or program so that our physicians can speak to other oncologists about what is the most important data to be aware of and what can we bring to a physician so they can make a go or no-go decision specifically about chemotherapy early or other types of treatment. And so the data that's coming out of the device, we feel like is valuable to patients who want to know about their current health status. Am I eligible for my next chemo? Is my blood trending in the right direction? Granted, the complexity of that data presented to a patient is going to be in something that's digestible for them and appropriate for their levels. Concurrently, the data coming out of the device that's for a physician to take action and really decide what to do, that has to be seamlessly integrated into the electronic medical record so it feels and acts as many of their other data points, because we're bringing blood cell counts, heart function, and vitals all together as a trending data point that will really help patients and help physicians understand what's next in their journey through treatment.
Kathy, is your plan to have the healthcare worker, whether it's the nurse, the physician, will they be in charge of training patients on how to use something like this, or will your team handle more of that in terms of the workload involved?
So in terms of patient a learning curve, the device itself will have all the microelectronics implanted in it, and that's implanted in the body. So there's actually, when it comes to remote patient monitoring, there's nothing for the patient to do. This is a standard of care that's been in practice for decades. And what we're doing is leveraging something that already exists, making it smart. And so it's passive remote data collection. If anything, a patient would need to learn is if they choose to have the patient-facing platform on their phone, that's the only learning curve they would have.
Then just one follow-up, we have found that specializing on this patient population, on this market is really smart. In terms of some of the other players out there, how strong, how tight is the IP? How easy would it be for someone else to try to compete with you here?
What we're doing is very hard. And our IP portfolio has a moat around the things that we're trying to accomplish and focus on. And so we have some level of confidence that what we're doing is quite unique in terms of miniaturizing sensor technology, power source, data compression, data reporting. And we're getting a lot of positive attention from port manufacturers, as well as leaders in healthcare industry, that what we're on to is really, like our name says, the next generation of data collection, remote patient monitoring that's implanted within a patient's body in a way that really reports out key markers and metrics to improve their outcomes.
Kathy, thank you for sharing very comprehensive and also very clear presentation. I have a question regarding your target customers. So you have roughly like 5 customers you're targeting for value creation with your solution. And my question is really, which one is your #1 priority over the next 6 to 12 months based on Euryskeus assumptions that you want to validate?
That's a really great point. We do touch patients, physicians, payers, providers, and pharma. And so what we're doing over the next 2 to 4 years is going to the FDA, testing the device, and then also getting a pathway toward commercialization. And one of the reasons we're raising money right now is to do specific market research to address the question that you're putting forth. Where is the best opportunity for us to enter early, mid-market, late market? It's a great question. Healthcare is incredibly complicated, and getting access to validated market reports is part of the use of our funds, as well as soliciting a highly qualified firm that we've already identified to do a market research around our opportunity, because we see cancer is so key. It's my story, it's my team members' story, but the reality is there's other ways for us to take our catheter technology, our optical technology, and move into cardiac areas, into renal areas to expand. And without boiling the ocean, we're staying focused on cancer, but the reality is we need help to get answers to some of those questions because it's so complex. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thanks. Maybe one follow-up question. So assuming that you figure out the technical feasibility and the product is usable, that means you can demonstrate value for the patient. Looking at the other stakeholders in your business model, which of those stakeholders are you most concerned about that could actually be a threat to your business in the future or to your success?
I'll flip that a little bit and think about who, you're right, I feel, and part of my mission and part of what we're doing in the world is to really make a positive impact on the lives of patients. So rather than thinking about who the threats are, I think about who provides us with the greatest opportunities. And so a couple key players rise to the top in my mind. One is the role of pharmaceutical manufacturers to be able to have a device implanted in a patient, passively collecting data around impact of drug interventions, which all of a sudden expands the market in terms of who can participate in clinical trials. So, and one of our patents has some language around that. The other is the payer market. The oncology is one of the last fields to move away from fee-to-service into value-based care, into capitation, bundled payments. And so the value we can bring to start to put some guardrails around adverse events, costs of care, highlighting trends toward infections before they get out of hand, bringing value to the payer landscape in cancer that has not yet been securely measured, and economic development around that, or health economics around that, I think would be incredibly valuable to payers, because we're gathering something that would be able to have longitudinal data for other patients. And I think of, if I had cancer and I had a smart port, that data is so valuable to me as an individual, but my aggregate de-identified data over time, coupled with hundreds and thousands of other patients, can point to future cancer patients, making the best recommendations around their access to care, their quality of care based on precision medicine or personalized medicine.
Okay. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you so much. Thanks as well to Sean and Chris for your great presentations. Thank you to Marco and Ethel and David for your perceptive questions and your insightful comments. Thanks to everyone for spending part of your day with us. Hope you all enjoyed the presentations. If you're interested in learning more about any of the companies, you can reach out directly to them or send us an email at ventures@matter.health. I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.